Welcome back to the Narrative Monopoly podcast. On today's episode, we have none other than the narrative king himself, Ben Hunt. Ben is the creator of Epsilon Theory, a publication that over 100,000 professional investors read, and it is a publication that you cannot put into a box. Ben is a total polymath. He's a really interesting guy. The conversation's wide-ranging. A little bit about him. He started off as a political science professor. He is the co-author of 2 books. He has started 2 technology companies, and he started investing in the beginning of the 21st century and has been at it for a while now. His perspective is almost entirely through the lens of narratives and how they shape our world. At Epsilon Theory, they also invest, and him and his business partners have created the narrative machine, which basically weighs narratives and leads them into thinking about how they're going to invest based on those narratives. So he's done a ton of work here. The conversation itself doesn't go too far into the weeds in regards to narratives. You can check out the show notes for the highlights of the episode. And I was really excited to get him on because I don't think anybody in the world knows this stuff as well as he does. He is also an incredibly well-intentioned guy. You can see from his Twitter account that he has been on the front lines shipping masks all over the place. No one asked him to do that. And then one piece that we didn't cover in the interview, which I'll link to in the show notes, is he has a post that popularized this concept of Gell-Mann amnesia. So if you haven't heard of this before, it's basically this concept that you read something in the newspaper that you know a lot about, and you realize that the person writing it just has a surface level understanding of the topic that they're writing about, and you're able to pick that out because you know what you're talking about. And then you go on to read the next story about something else, and you completely forget that you realize that the people writing these things only had a surface level understanding of them. And you go on to believe the next story. That's the amnesia. I believe Michael Crichton was the guy who pointed this out. He was a writer, and I will link to this into the show notes. It's a really great piece, probably my favorite from Epsilon Theory, even though it's one of the shorter ones for them, but it's essential reading. So I just wanted to point that out before we dive into the episode itself. But without further ado, let's press play on this thing. All right, Ben Hunt, thanks for coming on the podcast.
My pleasure, Jeff. Great to be here.
So you are the narrative king, and this is the Narrative Monopoly
I'll take that.
podcast. And so you had to be one of the early guests. So again, thank you for that. Who is your Twitter picture and why? I've always wondered that.
Well, so my avatar on Twitter and lots of other places is actually, it's a picture of an old dead Greek guy, right? And usually people do that in a I'll call it a self-aggrandizing way, right? Oh, here's a picture, a bust of Plato or something like that. But no, my avatar is a picture of Ptolemy. So Ptolemy, the author of the Ptolemaic system of astronomy, right? Where the Earth is at the center of the solar system, and the sun, the moon, the planets, they all go around the Earth. And I chose it because Ptolemy is the most famously wrong scientist, I think, in the history of the world. right? Because that Ptolemaic system, which was only replaced by the Copernican system, really 100 years after Copernicus published his work, in the late 1500s. For well over 1,000 years, the Ptolemaic system of putting the Earth at the center of the solar system, man, it's just a colossally wrong idea. And he was a colossally wrong scientist. And yet his work was still incredibly important, right? Because if your job is sailing a ship from, the port of Ostia to Alexandria or something like that, right? The Ptolemaic system works great. It to me, it embodies what science is all about, right? That theories are neither wrong nor right. They are more or less useful, right, for what you are applying science to do. And I find that attitude can help so much in avoiding what I'll call is scientism with a capital S, right? To ascribe some eternal truth or knowledge with a capital T or a capital K to what we're trying to do as scientists of the market or of politics or of nature. And so I know this is a much longer-winded story than you wanted, but it's an avatar of the most famously wrong scientist. And yet, in my mind, Ptolemy is really kind of a hero because what he did, even though it was wrong, was very useful for all humans who lived during that time period. So anyway, that's my avatar. It's a picture of Ptolemy, the most famously wrong guy in the world.
I mean, I didn't know that. So is it in a meta sense? Are you saying that, he's a hero and this is, what a lot of what Epsilon Theory is doing is wrong. It goes against the narrative, but it's also useful. Or are you saying it's more of a meta sense of we're living through this time where we think that the Earth is the center of the solar system?
Yeah, it's more the former than the latter, right? It's not really a take on some sort of centrist view of that is inherently, I think, flawed. But it's really more talking about how we're all trying to get asymptotically closer to truth. We're never going to get there. Our theories are just more or less useful ways for us to try to figure out the world. So what I'm trying to do in Epsilon Theory is to figure out the world, at least figure out aspects of human behavior, let's say. And this gets into my work on narratives and how crowds and how human beings, these social animals, are wired to respond to messages and the unstructured text that we are inundated with. But it is also against that notion that there is ever a capital truth with a capital T that we're going to find in this effort. Well, even though we have lots of people trying to tell us that's the case.
Right. I saw a tweet the other day that was actually pretty interesting. Usually I think most tweets are pretty trite. This one really was eye-opening, and it essentially said, imagine if human beings lived to be 400 or 500 years old, how naive the wisest among us would look to those people. And I think that and we're going to get into, is there inflation, what's going on with the Fed? And I think that, our frame of reference with what's going on right now, a lot of that has to do with just the financial crisis. And obviously, people who actually work in finance and study this stuff are well versed on whether it's the crashes of the late 19th century or the Federal Reserve System and all that stuff. But I think just in terms of mainstream narratives, it's all coming back to, oh, well, how does this compare to the financial crisis, right? 10 years away. And so I'm interested to hear kind of your view, if you were to place yourself 300 years in the future, or just looking 300 years back, what is going on right now, if you would zoom out in terms of, obviously the Fed just completely erased the market downturn within a month, but now we have, what is it, 2-3 trillion dollars of just printed money. We're already
Yeah, a lot more than that, right? Just this year, right? You've seen that big expansion. Well, look, I think that's broadly correct, Jeff. That we are always assuming that we here in the present have some greater insight or knowledge than people did in the past, and that's absolutely false. And that you're right that people in the future would look back and say that we're naive. I actually think that people in the future will fall prey to the same problem of thinking they've got it all figured out.
right.
In truth, we're no smarter. In fact, none of us are as smart as, right, Socrates was 2,500 years ago. So it's important to think about the things that stay the same, which are our human capacity for figuring the world out, right? Our human failings and overconfidence that we have got it all figured out. And frankly, the constants that always play out in markets, which are fear and greed. Right? Those are really the true constants. That really doesn't change over time. Now, some things do change over time. Right? Certainly our technology changes over time. I've described in the past the human animal as basically being a termite with opposable thumbs and large enough to control fire. That's kind of what we are. We're social animals. We are prisoners and beneficiaries of our biology in that respect. We're also, though, the beneficiaries and sometimes the prisoners of our technology, our ability to control fire. Whatever fire means in the current context. So certainly our technology has changed, and also I'll call it our mode of social organization does change over time. We have a mass society today that frankly would not have been recognizable even 200 years ago, just with the sheer numbers and the impact of our fire making, our technology, and the way that permeates through our society. We have a networked society, a networked mass society today, and that is different from the world even 50 years ago, much less a couple of hundred years ago.
Right. So everything is the same on a micro level. Humans are still humans. We're driven by the same emotions and thought processes. But on a macro level, we're trying to tame a beast that we've never tamed before. So getting back to this question of, what the Fed has done, I mean, it's never been done before, right? We've never actually had a Federal Reserve in a society. I mean, America is, in the West, this is the first time that central banking has actually happened, right? Over the 10,000 year history of kind of humans being intelligent enough to organize. What's going to happen?
Well, I think that there were really two major changes that happened in the aftermath of the great financial crisis in 08 and 09. And I think both of these changes, I'll call it the toolbox that policymakers have. All of these changes were designed to fight a war against deflation, right? Deflation is when prices go down. and when prices go down, particularly in a mass society like the United States that's built on a consumer basis or model, whatever you will call it. I mean, consumer spending is the United States economy. And when housing prices, when you have a nationwide home price collapse, as we did in 2008, that's a killer. That's a killer for the whole economy, for the whole society, for the whole politics, for everyone who's done well, for everyone who's in a position of power. That's an existential threat, right? So deflationary collapse is the thing that policymakers in a mass society say, nope, can't have that. We will do whatever it takes, to use Draghi's famous phrase, to prevent that from happening. So the first thing that the central bank, all central banks did, but we'll focus on the Fed that did. The first thing they did, because this is the toolkit, this is what the toolkit was they took interest rates, short-term interest rates, down to zero.
Which are still there.
Still there, right? And because that's the traditional tool that central banks have, right? They are the money printer in a fiat world, and so that short-term interest rate is what they are charging the banks, the people who get the money, right? What's the cost of money to them? Right? And this is what central banks have always done. They take those short-term interest rates down to zero, and they hope that that's enough to stem the tide of deflation, of prices going down. And of course, what happened in 08 was it wasn't enough. Right? We can talk about why it wasn't enough, but it wasn't enough. So Bernanke, and what I'm describing to you is fascinating. This is all from Bernanke's own words. In the last speech he gave as Fed chair, he talked about what they had done and the tools they had come up with. It's funny what people say in their final speech, right? It's like George Washington in his final speech. If you've seen Hamilton, Alexander Hamilton wrote that speech, and Washington is warning against foreign entangling alliances, right? Or Dwight D. Eisenhower, he leaves, he gives his final speech, and he's warning against the military-industrial complex. I mean, my God, if Dwight D. Eisenhower is warning you against the military-industrial complex, right? Well, this was kind of like this for Ben Bernanke when he was talking about, when he gave his last speech leading the Fed. And he said, so look, the first thing we did was what we always knew how to do, which was take our short-term interest rates down to zero. So we did that. It was basically a speed bump. It did nothing. So we came up with this plan, this toolkit. We called it quantitative easing. And what it really is extraordinary use of the Federal Reserve's balance sheet, not just their interest-setting power over their issuance of money to the banks that they get the money from them, but it's actually, well, what if we used some of that money, some of that hypothetical money, to actually buy stuff? yeah. So let's. They always had a balance sheet. They always had some stuff that they had bought, and it wasn't small. It was a couple $100 billion worth of stuff. And by stuff, I mean financial assets, right? So treasuries, right? So if you want to try to do something with the other aspects of interest rates, not just short-term interest rates, but longer-term interest rates, well, one way is the supply and demand. One way to drive down the price of those longer-term bonds, right? Is let's buy them up, right? Let's increase the price of those bonds by buying them, which decreases the yield, right? Which decreases the interest rates.
And the problem here is they haven't stopped doing that, right? And that's I think a lot of your work.
So let me just say, so this is what Bernanke said. So he said the first time we did this, QE1, we bought lots of bonds. And in addition to US Treasuries, they also bought mortgage-backed securities. So this was QE1, and Bernanke said, and I totally agree with this, that it saved the world. Right? This is the program in March of 2009, and this is what central banks are supposed to do. That they are the ones to give that shot of adrenaline. In financial speak, we'll call it liquidity. They are the ones to provide money into the global economic system when the heart, the global economic system, has stopped beating, when there is no buying and selling, when people only want to sell. They are there to step in and say, nope, we are the buyer. We are that buyer of last resort, and we'll do it in an enormous fashion. And it worked.
It's interesting you talk about this because I'm almost done reading House of Morgan,
Yeah.
Chernow book, and he was talking about how J.P. Morgan was
The
basically,
man.
the man, Pierre
The
Paul
man did
Morgan
this. Yes,
was the
yes,
guy
yes.
who was in charge of stepping in and making sure that
Yep.
beating heart kept going. Yeah, not to interrupt you there, but it's interesting
No,
that was
not at
one
all.
guy.
That's exactly right. And that's so, before we had really active central banks, we had individuals like J.P. Morgan. His nickname was Jupiter, right? Because he was Jove. He was the god of the system because he and his bank, right, able to step in there and say, nope, I'm going to play that role of that buyer of last resort. I'm going to provide that. So now, in mass society, it's much bigger. We need that central bank to do that. That's what the Fed did in early 2009. I believe that saved the world. The problem, as you said, Jeff, is that, and this is what always happens, right, is that emergency government action becomes emergency government policy, right? That you don't stop with, all right, we saved the world, we've revived the patient, and now, the patient's got to recover, and oh, no, it's not. Well, we're getting a lot of acclaim, and stocks are up on this. Why don't we just keep doing a little bit? And in fact, Bernanke said this. He said, look, so then we did QE2. He said, I got to tell you, yeah, it worked for markets. Stocks went up. But for the real economy, right, for
Main Street.
Right, for Main Street, for our mandate, right, to stable prices and full employment, we thought QE2 was kind of a wash. And he said, QE3 and QE infinity, honestly, I kind of feel like it was maybe a little counterproductive. Right? This is Ben Bernanke saying this at the end of his tenure before Janet Yellen comes in. And he said, but then we came up with another toolkit. We came up with a toolkit. We call it communications policy. We call it forward guidance. We call it using our words, not our checkbook, not our printer, but using our words intentionally to try to change market behavior, right? So that we don't have to actually go out and buy $5 trillion more worth of bonds or securities or stocks or what have you. No, we're going to tell everyone that we're never going to stop doing this. Right? That we're always going to be there to provide that backstop and to provide that liquidity, even if there's just a little hiccup, even if the heart is just kind of slowing down a little bit. It's not stopping. No, we're going to be there to give you another big shot of adrenaline. And he said, wow, this really worked. Now, what they did, this is what hasn't stopped. You're correct that the actual buying of assets has not stopped. And in fact, it picked up again in an enormous way with the COVID crisis. Actually started picking up a little before that, in September of last year, or September of 2019. I forget, we're in 2021 now. So yes, and this is the way it is with so much in life, right? Yes, and yes, the Federal Reserve, particularly when we have another heart-stopping moment like March of 2020 and COVID is bringing our entire economy to a halt. Yes, they still step in and provide that liquidity and build out that massive balance sheet and $4 trillion or $5 trillion worth of support. And I think more importantly, they continue to use their words and their narratives to create this belief, what we call common knowledge, right? Is what everyone knows that everyone knows, is that the Fed's got your back, that number go up, whether we're talking about Bitcoin or we're talking about stonks, and this is the new way of the world. So, this is what the Fed did. Yes, there was, I'll call it the mechanistic aspect of buying stuff and printer go burr. More importantly, I think, is the narrative that printer is always there to go burr.
Right.
And that's the real power.
And this has real world impacts that are not positive. And this is where you get into the burn it the fuck down, right? That's your slogan. Sure. If you follow Ben on Twitter, you definitely know that he tweets that. I think that the piece that really moved me this year when you talk about that was, I think it was called Do the Right Thing, where we talked, you spoke about
the airline CEOs.
Yes, the airline CEOs, where, somehow these companies that spent hundreds of millions of dollars on buying back their own stock over the last billions over the last, I believe it was 6 years.
Yep.
And the managers, and I use that term specifically, who set that up, got handsomely rich,
hundreds of millions of dollars,
and then come hat in hand to the federal government. And again, I mean, the thing about the Fed, right, is they purchased a ton of debt, right? They basically, I mean, they purchased it in terms of just printing it. So when they come to the federal government, I mean, that's also in that sense, it's coming from the Fed as well. But this narrative, I mean, it opened the door to, if we get into hot water, there's always going to be an exit valve, right? If we're of a certain class, if we're of
a certain size. Yep.
Yes.
Privatize the gains, socialize the losses. And that's what I reserve. When I talk about burn it the fuck down, and I'm talking about the system, right? Well, and I'm talking specifically about the perversions of the system that are now so commonplace that allow this. I'll use this. I certainly think it's a socially destructive, but I would go farther than to say that it's a mendacious, evil disparity of wealth, where it is and I'm all for wealth. Right? I'm all for getting rich, making money, doing all that, right? What I am not for is a system that allows that to occur without risk taking, because it's not the risk takers, it's not the entrepreneurs, it's not the founders who are making all this money. It is managers, right? It is the chief legal guys. Officer, right? Or the chief accounting officer for a Fortune 500 company, an S&P 500 company, who's now a decamillionaire for being in the right place at the right time, right? They become a member of this privileged caste by being a manager in a world of, free money if you're a public company, 0% interest rates, and an environment where their efforts to reward themselves are intentionally hidden by a narrative of, oh, this is good, yay capitalism and yay stock market. When what it really is just a seizure of billions of dollars for people who aren't taking risks. It's thievery, right? And it's that system, and we can talk about all sorts of ways in which this plays out. It plays out in organizations like the AMA, the American Medical Association, right, which is an organization set up to do exactly the sort of thing, just enrich their own managers, under the guise of, oh, we're doing good works and we're this not-for-profit organization. Not-profit world, for-profit world, political world, business world, it's all of a piece, and that's it's that system that allows it that I want to burn the fuck down.
Yeah, I think we're both capitalists, and I think that comes down to the question of, basically what you're describing is everyone's taking a rake out of the system. And but if you for the poker players out there, if the rake is more than a few percent, then
10% of the pot, that seems a little much, right?
So why are you playing? So the question becomes, how do you fix this with with actually keeping, the tenets of capitalism, which is really just individual freedom, alive. Because, I think a lot of what you're describing is the delta between what the Chamber of Commerce claims to represent and what they represent, right? Like they're not
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
when they make the tax code more complicated in some ways, right? I mean, the reform, it depends what kind of business you are, but if there's, if they push for these regulations that they're saying are helping this industry, well, it doesn't help the smallest players in that industry. If you're a 50-person company and there is a 50,000-person company that is pushing for a regulation, I guarantee you that it is at the expense of the 50-person company. And I think that
Yep.
that's where it gets conflated, right? That's not capitalism necessarily. I mean, it's quote unquote business, but it's not
No,
necessarily
it's not.
just
It's not. No, it's not. Look, I like to go back to Adam Smith and the Wealth of Nations, right? So, Mr. Capitalism, this, because you read Adam Smith, and he absolutely sees a role for government, and so do I, right? Not for government to own the means of production,
right.
right? Yeah, not for government to allocate capital, but for government to do exactly what I'm talking about, right? Providing clear, transparent rules and regulations so that individuals and corporations can't steal. So that managers can't steal from the shareholders, because that is exactly what's going on. So that companies can't present, a untested pharmaceutical and say, hey, it cures cancer, and take your money for that, right? There is a clear, and I would argue in a mass society, even more crucial role for government to play here. Now, this can be really simple stuff. Here's an example. If you're a publicly traded company, the CEO of the company cannot be the chairman of the board. How about we just do that? All right? How about we just do that?
And
Right?
what would that do? What would that do?
Well, because it's the most amazing coincidence, right? So the most recent example of this is GE. So GE was one of the crown jewels of the American economy. It was an industrial company, General Electric. It was an industrial company that became, in the late 90s and the first decade of this century, first became a media company, and then decided to become a financial company. Why did they do this? They did this because it would give them a bigger multiple, they believed, on their stock price. It created a better story for to make the stock number go up. In fact, the way they did this, and with the financial crisis, it was exactly the wrong thing to do. They lost hundreds of billions of dollars. They were bailed out by the federal government. And frankly, they should have gone out of business. GE should have been wiped out. But they weren't. Too big to fail, all that. Okay, that happened. The managers of GE, going back to Jack Welch, then Jeff Immelt, they did so handsomely. They did great for themselves. Even through all this collapse, they did great, because what they were masters at doing is what I'll describe as financialization, right? Using leverage, not doing better as a company by making a better product at a better price and improving productivity. No, but by changing leverage, by creating a better story for Wall Street, by buying back your stock, and by, as a result of that, rewarding yourself handsomely. The famous story with Jeff Immelt, the former CEO of GE, was that he didn't have one giant jumbo corporate jet. No. Whenever Jeff Immelt traveled, he took two giant corporate jets with him, because God forbid there was a mechanical problem on one of his jumbo jets, why then Jeff needed his other jumbo jet to always be there in reserve to take him to where he wanted to go. I mean, you just can't make this shit up. Right? Except, again, truth is stranger than fiction, right? So this doesn't stop. So the most recent story with GE is the current CEO of GE, who came in. The board brought him in. He was an outside hire. They brought him in and said, okay, we gotta revamp the company. We gotta fire lots of people. We gotta do all this. That's fine. That is capitalism, right? This is what productivity and saving companies and all like that requires. But the way that the new CEO was going to be compensated was really based on stock price. And what I mean by that is that, yes, he gets a salary of, a princely salary, a couple of $1 million a year. But the real rewards were, if you hit these stock targets over the next 5 years, we, the company GE, we're going to pay you $240 million. Yeah. Now there's an apple to catch your eye, right? $240 million, and the target is if you hit these stock prices.
So the thing that's hard there, right, is that's a good idea in theory, in principle.
No, it's not. No, it's not even in principle. Let me come back to that. It's just not. This notion that you're going to align the interest of shareholders with management by tying their rewards to the stock price, that it does not work, because it automatically gets perverted and in exactly the way I'm going to describe. So here's what's happened to GE. So the COVID thing hits, and GE stock price is not doing well in March. And so the GE CEO goes to the board and he says, well, I'd like to make a proposal. I would like to redo my contract to make my stock targets much lower. Let's cut those stock targets for me to make my big bonuses. Let's cut them by more than half. And the board says yes. Now, here's the kicker. Guess who was chairman of the board? The same dude. The same dude. When they brought him in, they didn't just make him CEO, they also made him chairman of the board. Right? So the chairman of the board, the CEO of the company says, we need to redo my deal, because God knows I'm the only one in the history of the world who could ever do this job with GE. And of course, the stock price comes back. And so this year he's going to get a bonus of 40 million, which puts him on the way to this bigger bonus of 240 million. This is the problem with what you're describing about trying to align shareholder interests with management. Shareholder interests are never completely aligned, or even really very well aligned with management. There's always a tension here. And to kind of throw up our hands and to say, oh, well, you're going to get rewarded if the stock price gets rewarded. Well, guess what's going to happen? The company is going to be run not for, I'll call it real profits, not for increasing productivity, not for making a better product at a better price at a lower cost, but it's going to be designed for doing what is necessary and compensating management in a way that is based on the stock price.
No, I mean, that's a great rebuttal, right? I mean, I'm a true believer that almost all human actions are driven by incentives. And that is truly the incentive. I mean, the one thing that I'm thinking about here that is a caveat is founder-led companies and who has kind of the ultimate say, right? I mean, when you think about Facebook, I mean, it is obviously taken on a life of its own, but at the end of the day, I have a true reverence for entrepreneurs, and that's Zuckerberg's baby, right? I mean, it's obviously out into the ether, and this is a really extreme example, but let's say it's John Deere, who I don't know if John Deere stayed on, when the company actually listed, but even a smaller example, where's the line there? I mean, they founded the company in their garage. They toiled away for 5 years. It wasn't working.
I'll tell you where the line is. I'll tell you exactly where the line is. Don't go public. Don't go public, right? So when Facebook went public, the IPO was set up so that, we're going to sell lots of stock, but there's a whole separate share class of stock for Mark.
Right.
So Mark doesn't, give up his ownership of the company. He still in terms of voting shares and the different stock shares, he owns it. He still owns it all. So it's a very simple answer to your question. You're a founder. You want to be incredibly rich and powerful and make a great company. Fantastic. I love that. Don't be a public company. My rule is a public company has to have an independent chairman of the board. Period.
I'll give you one more.
Okay.
Founder owns 80% of the company. They want to tap into public markets. They're only going to sell 10% of the company when they go public. They own 70%. How are you going to rip the chairmanship away from them? And even if you do, isn't that just artificial? They still own 70%.
Look, if they own 70% of the company, they've got the voting rights then to at the shareholder vote, right, to pack the board however they want to pack it. What I'm saying, and this would be my rule, because I think it's gone to the point where edge cases like you're describing can't drive what I think is the regulatory environment necessary, not to level the playing field, but to provide some measure of control over the rapacious, the perverse system that has been built up here. My rule would be, if you're a public company, you got to have an independent chairman of the board. That's all. That's there are lots of rules. There are lots of regulations for being a public company, right? Your example, dude owns 80% of this amazingly profitable company.
I'm just giving you a hard time playing devil's advocate.
Right. Wants to go public, right? There are lots of things you got to do to legally go public. I'm saying this is another one. You got to follow all this. Going public is an enormous exercise in regulation, right? So the financial statements you've got to sign off on, the penalties for doing wrong financial statements, the constraints on what you can say publicly about your company, right, are enormous. And this is another perversion. They also get scoffed at when you get like Elon Musk, getting less than a wrist slap by the SEC for all the crap he pulls, and it is crap, right? It is absolute crap that he pulls as a publicly traded company. This is my point. You want to be a public traded company? Fine, great. One of the rules is your chairman of the board has to be an independent director.
So this is one of the rules. I think an episode that's going to come out before this is with Martin Geary, who talks a lot about how people want to just burn the system down and it's pure nihilism. And I know that that's not you. I know that you have put a lot more thought into this than that. Is it in the abstract? Is it really taming the managerial class and the financialization of these companies? Is that what is going to come in the place of burning it down, burning this system? I mean, I guess I want to ask you in an open-ended way, because that's a very specific rule you just proposed, in a very specific way, like what comes up from the ashes. And I do think it's through these themes that we've already touched on.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, the challenge is that I think you can easily identify this process of financialization and managerialization and thievery in every human endeavor, right? All of the great guilds of human activity, right? Whether it's medicine or law or business, military, banking, in any of these kind of great edifices of human activity, you can find this taking place. And so it's not a single thing where you can say, oh, change X, and it tick, 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 all the dominoes fall into place. What it requires, I think, is this enormously long game to play, where it requires people of goodwill working tirelessly towards a goal of what I'd call the small L liberal virtues, right? Autonomy of yes, your liberties, right? But more importantly, your autonomy of mind. And also the small c conservative values, right? A respect for and an appreciation for the past, for for what's come before, as well as what we hope comes later. I don't think that these things happen very easily or well from a top-down perspective. I think that what you have to do is you have to work, again, over a long period of time from the bottom up in small ways with a goal of changing rules and structure such that these top-down entities then over time find themselves transformed from the inside. That's the game. And it requires that level of energy and frankly anger to sustain a long-term goal like that. Because this, again, it's not something that gets changed in an election. It's not something that gets changed with a passage of this law or that law. It's something that requires that burning, angry energy to stay the course and make these changes across all of these fields of human endeavor to change the structure and the rules so that we can, my children and grandchildren can get to a better place.
Well, I really like that answer. I mean, I totally agree with you when you're talking about how change has to come at the local level. I mean, I'm personally very kind of disheartened with the fact that most Americans, it seems like, have come to believe that not only the country, but their personal future somehow is determined by who wins the next presidential election.
Right.
And there are just, I mean, there are thousand, I think, what is it, 4,000 counties in the United States of America, probably a couple of 10,000 towns that people live in. And obviously, there's, I think it's 70% of Americans live around urban areas or near an urban center. But that being said, people have a lot of control within their own personal life, their family, whatever civic organizations they're involved in. I guess the one thing I'd say is, you brought up Wealth of Nations too. I mean, that's I believe in that book too. He talks about how local merchants would get into a bar and collude because that's just normal human nature, right? And so that's what's happening on a really large scale.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're just doing your best, if you're living in Wheeling, West Virginia, or Dayton, Ohio, and you're just doing your best, and or actually Lordstown, Ohio, that there was a big deal when that GM plant closed.
Mm-hmm.
What are you supposed to do? Because this is the friction, right? 50 years ago or 60 years ago, whatever it was, these towns there was no internet. These the people you knew were in your town. You had a lot of these guys at company jobs. They'd retire with a union pension, and it was a good life, a little American dream. And now these kind of these larger movements that we've been talking about towards financialization, the managerial class, what they've done, that's out of your control if you live in one of those little towns, right? So I think that that is a good answer if you live in New York City and you have a bit of power to do the right thing, to opt out. I believe that's the term you used, to opt out in the piece you wrote. But there's a lot of people that may not have an impact there, that can't make an impact.
Well, a couple of comments there, Jeff. Right. So first of all, look, I'm not saying that who's president doesn't matter. It matters a lot. It matters a lot who's president.
Well, sure.
What I am saying though is that we've been convinced, intentionally told, and persuaded that our local actions, our actions, what we do, the good works that human beings do all the time, right? In small ways, that doesn't really matter, right? To matter, to make a difference, you have to align yourself with one of the big, either your giant company or the giant political party. That's how you make a difference, right? What I'm talking about is for your own individual actions. I'm not saying that who's president doesn't matter, right? What I'm saying is that for you to make a difference in this world, it happens at that local level. It happens in your community. It doesn't happen because you give freaking, $25 more to the Trump campaign or the Biden campaign or any of these guys, right? That's not how you make a difference. That's what I mean by that. Not that it doesn't, who's president doesn't matter. I'm saying that's how you make a difference with your own life. Now, and what I'd say about making a difference with your own life, and again, this is why it really matters how we think about these things. Well, people say kind of as by rote, like, oh, I'm a capitalist, I believe in capitalism. Well, you know what capitalism means? It means that GM plant is going to close, right? Capitalism is creative destruction. That's what it is. And I it's why I get frustrated, right? You can hear in my voice because we are told, again, intentionally, that we should have this attitude of yay, capitalism, as a veneer, as an excuse for the perverse things that happen in our society and our system that have nothing to do with capitalism. And then it's also used to obfuscate that the destruction side of creative destruction with capitalism. And again, that is a role. There is an absolute role for government to play to smooth, to lessen the impact of the creative destruction of capitalism. And finally, what I'd say about this is it's always been this way, right? And it's always, there's always been the opportunity. This is how we started the conversation, right? That some things do change, technology changes, the way we use fire changes. But what hasn't changed is at that, as you said, at the micro level, the human level of fear and greed and the like, but also at the societal level of the non 1%. They don't get a lot of choices in this regard. And that's why it's so important to me, I think, that that all of us recognize when we're being told a line in a story, and that all of us take personal actions to try to find our pack, our methods of supporting ourselves and with our family, our friends, our church, our school, whatever that pack is. These are the people who don't see you as a means to an end. And that sure as hell ain't your political party, and it sure as hell ain't your corporation. We have to find those modes of connecting with other human beings who see us as an end in itself and not as a means to an end. That's our only defense against this, Jeff. Right? And that's always been our only defense against this. It's just that now it's harder than ever to mount that defense because we're inundated with the messaging, we're inundated with the narratives from that political party or that corporation to take our eye off of that of that effort to find other like-minded human beings.
Well, I really like that answer. A big reason why I started this podcast was to speak with people like you who have thought deeply about this stuff. And, I don't want each episode to be narrative this, narrative that,
Yeah.
despite the fact that the name is the narrative monopoly, it's really in a meta sense of, we live in a world, in my opinion, of monopolized narratives where everything is, every idea that is downstream from, or I'm sorry, upstream from the actions we take,
Mm-hmm.
is from a narrative. And if people can't understand what the nuance is, what the context is, and to a lot of your points, like, where's the narrative coming from and why is it coming and who is it affecting, really digging deep into these things, because narratives are really powerful. I mean, they're important. I mean, narratives are not,
Absolutely.
necessarily a bad thing.
Not at all.
Yeah, but it is a bad thing if, in my opinion, if they become monopolized and people are affected in an adverse way. And I think it's a lot of it is society that's being affected in an aggregate way, and they can't read through these narratives. And that's why I think it's really important to have these conversations, because there are a lot of people. I mean, you do this explicitly, but there are a lot of people who are starting to, I don't want to say wake up, but really cut into what's going on in terms of these narratives that are being shipped out for specific reasons.
But Jeff, I think the antidote to all of to what you're describing as the narrative monopoly, the antidote is to find your pack, right? Is to find actual real life human connections with people among whom you can make mistakes, with people among whom you can do the wrong thing and get past that, right? Where people, again, don't see you as a means to an end, but people see you as an autonomous human being of value in and of yourself. And it's so easy for that to get ripped away from us in a mass society where our tools of technology, our control over fire, right, has advanced to the point where, we've all got these little, I'm holding up my iPhone right now. We've all got these our dopamine machines, right? We've all got our monkey on our back. We've all got our addiction right here. And it's so hard to, and in fact, really, it's impossible, I think, to go off the grid to say, oh, well, I'm not going to be on Twitter. I'm not going to be on Facebook. I'm not going to be on the internet, right? Come on, man. That's part of what why they're monopolies, right? You can't just opt out of the system. We have to find ways to maintain our sanity and maintain our autonomy of mind while still living within the system. And I swear to you that the way to do that, what will give you strength to maintain that autonomy of mind, is to find your pack, to find the friends, the family, the other human beings around the world who are also truth seekers. And it changes your life and your world so dramatically. It gives you that because you know that if you get in trouble, they've got your back, and they know that if they have a hard time, you've got their back. You've got to be willing to sacrifice for your pack, and that's what it takes.
I think when you talk about truth seekers in the pursuit of truth, if you're going to truly pursue it, you have to be able to risk being wrong. Otherwise, you're never going to get the truth.
You've got to be Ptolemy, man. It's where we started this conversation. You've got to be willing to be wrong, right? But you keep on working at it because you're trying to find a truth with a small t, not with a giant T, not an eternal truth. It ain't there, man. You're trying to find those small t truths to make life a little bit better every day in whatever sphere you can connect with. That's what we're trying to do.
Well, I think that's probably a good place to wrap up.
Right on, man. This was a blast. Thanks for having me on.
All right. Hey, thanks for coming on, Ben. Hope we can do it again soon.
That's right. You can get, and if anybody's interested in more about stuff, it's all on. My moniker is Epsilon Theory, so it's at Epsilon Theory on Twitter. It's epsilontheory.com. But love to have anyone who's listening come read some more.
They should subscribe to Epsilon Theory. I could say that with 100%. That is a truth. That is a truth right there.
There you go.
All right. Thanks, Ben.
You got it.
And there you have it. That's the episode with Ben. I really enjoyed it. I know there was a little bit of internet connectivity issues there. I'm not sure if you realize that or not. Hopefully was able to smooth that over in the editing process. But if you haven't done so already, go ahead and follow Ben at Epsilon Theory, but also subscribe. You can buy a paid subscription to Epsilon Theory, but you can also get a lot of their stuff for free. I'm sure Ben would want me to encourage everyone to go ahead and put their credit card in, but you can certainly check it out with the training wheels on. Next week we have Gerard Baker, former editor-in-chief of the Wall Street Journal. It was the longest conversation to date, and I think that's because it flowed so smoothly. And I am really excited for everyone to listen to that. So go ahead and press subscribe. Give us a 5-star review if you're feeling generous, and we'll see you next week. Thanks.